terms of people connecting and getting to talk about stuff.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I might even put this into the beginning of it. So let's throw an introduction here since we kind of hit the ground running.
Sure.
And then we'll kind of hop back into that idea, because I think that's kind of a good way to start. First of all, hello, everybody. You kind of got a little pre-roll and before the credit sequence here. And we are here doing a Mainline memory with Mr. Chris Sciullo. And he was brought to us from the awesome and amazing and creative Samantha Morgan, which we both appreciate. And today we are going to be talking about whatever kind of comes to mind here. But first of all, what you were just saying is really perfect. I agree. And for me, it kind of just getting into this inspired me to really kick off like my movie reviewing and just kind of doing all of this stuff. Because what the heck? Why not? Right?
Right. Yeah.
And what you were just saying about how it's a way to connect, I know that Fantastic Fest is going to have something similar this year, which I love Fantastic Fest, and I've never been able to go, and I might be able to at least get some version of a pass, even though it's probably pretty expensive. I just recently reviewed Aetheria's film festival. They had a whole set of shorts they put on Shudder. And that's a film festival that, like South by Southwest, couldn't do anything. South by Southwest put a bunch of stuff on Amazon this year. So for movie lovers, it who can't necessarily get out and do the festival circuit, it's been pretty cool. So
yeah, absolutely. TIFF just announced something as well too. I mean, they're going to have a smaller lineup this year, but still, it's a Toronto International Film Festival from your couch. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's almost leads to, and then we'll get into the actual beginning of our meat of our conversation. But this actually even brings me to things like I, for the longest time, have suggested that things like college educations shouldn't be what they are. Like right now, you spend whatever $30,000-$40,000 a year or more, depending on where you go to school. And it's this exclusive thing, and there's only so many spots, and there's a very class and economic element to it for people. There's no reason that, anybody who can pay a smaller fee because they could have 1 million students couldn't go to Harvard or couldn't go to wherever and do it like this.
Right.
Because other than going to a lab and doing lab stuff and doing some practical hands-on stuff, there isn't much you can't do with video conferencing. And
right. I think this was kind of a big experiment. And some people were concerned that, well, if we start doing digital meetings and people working from home, things are going to fall apart. And in fact, the opposite has happened.
Yeah.
I think it's actually people have adapted very quickly to it, and our work has kind of stayed the same, and education stayed the same, and the sky didn't fall. So I think that this is kind of a new direction.
Especially for informational type stuff. When you just need information from one person to another. Now it's different. Like I work in a service industry. Well, a service industry is a service industry. You're going to have some hands-on, four-wall experience for people. But if it's delivery of goods, or if it's information you're giving across, or tax advice or legal, I mean, a lot of that stuff you could just do like this. Anyway, let's circle back around. Which is fine. We there's no like super hardcore structure to this. So this kind of stuff is fine. But what I start with though usually is an especially impactful, funny, awkward, emotional, whatever, movie going experience that you had, and we'll just kind of see where that leads.
Yeah, so I know you had mentioned you talked to Sam about Midsummer. Hereditary was actually kind of one of my big moments, but I thought about talking about Hereditary, but I actually I kind of want to talk about Event Horizon.
Okay.
Because I saw that in theaters when I was.
So did I.
I was 13 or 14. Yeah.
I was older.
And well, so it was at the time it was HBO was doing a lot of they would do behind the scenes featurettes in the middle of their programming of stuff that was going to eventually air on HBO. So it would be in the theaters. They'd have behind the scenes promotional stuff, and then it would end up on HBO at some point. They would do it with like Alien Resurrection and a bunch of other movies that were coming out. And so Event Horizon looked kind of interesting. It's the guy that did Mortal Kombat, Paul W.S. Anderson.
Sure.
And it was like, okay, well, this looks, it's a haunted house movie in space. That's basically all anybody knew about it. So me and some friends went. to the theater, and it was just a very different experience than that. I think everybody kind of got different things from it, but it was not at all what we thought going in. And I remember kind of really being into the idea of kind of combining a lot of science and a lot of sci-fi and horror elements together. And then there's a scene, not to spoil anything, but there's the SOS scene
Right.
that happened. And I literally was like gripping my seat because it was just so disturbing and so weird. And yeah, and when you're seeing it for the first time, and there's so many things happening and you're never totally sure what's happening. But when you kind of have it on home on DVD or Blu-ray and you can slow it down, you're like, that's upsetting. There's a lot of
well, and
really
he even had stuff that they have some of the cut footage they put back out for people to see. But even what was in the theatrical release was pretty gory for a kind of a mainstream release. And I remember that coming out, it being like it was kind of marketed as just kind of a popcorny, spooky space, not Alien exactly, but kind of that feel with more of a, possession angle to it or something. And, and I remember going in and being like, and it had great actors in it too, which was awesome.
Absolutely.
That was really good. I mean, you get Lawrence Fishburne and Sam Neill, which you can't go wrong with those guys. And that other dude that's in everything in that era. What's that guy's name? The blonde haired, like kind of squat, like muscular dude that's in there. He's like, I want to say you know what I'm talking about, right?
Well, the guy that actually goes out in the airlock.
Yeah, I can't remember that guy's name. Oh, anyway, he was in a bunch of stuff.
The actor's name is Jack Noseworthy.
Yes,
but
Noseworthy.
Jason Isaacs is in that. Joey Richards. There's a ton of really, really good actors in it, and I think that's part of. I think that there's a way to kind of straddle the line between acting very seriously and kind of knowing you're doing something campy, and kind of being able to juggle those. And everybody was able to do that. And other performances from all the other actors in it, they've done that before. Sam Neill's been in a ton of horror movies and knows when to kind of wink at the audience and when to not. And Lawrence Fishburne's done that with, especially with the stuff in the new John Wick movies. Knows when to kind of mug for the camera and when to be Lawrence Fishburne. And the performances are really strong, and the idea is really creative. And admittedly, it gets a little confusing to follow, and it's not entirely. But I think that's kind of adds to the mystery behind it, and makes it just really. No one's entirely certain what's happening and what's going to happen. And I think that kind of that idea of being, I mean, you're trapped in a spaceship. It's not like you can go home,
right?
Like you're stuck in this tin can, and there might or might not be, hell might or might not be in there with you. And especially as I've watched it and I've gotten older, it's very campy, and it's nowhere near as scary as it is when you see it as a teenager for the first time. But I think it still holds up. It's a really fun movie. It's a movie that, from die-hard horror fans and conversations I've had with them, it's always one that kind of catches people off guard. Like, people will, they'll talk about the classic Exorcist and everything like that. But then when somebody mentions Event Horizon, people are like, that's kind of, there's a little bit more to it than you'd think.
Yeah, and I think it's gained a bit of definitely a cult following over time. But I agree. To me, and I think back about it, the way it was kind of, we were talking about how it's kind of like that, the Alien comparisons or Exorcist comparisons or whatever. For me, the comparisons that work really well are actually the Carpenter comparisons. And I think of Prince of Darkness, if you've seen Prince of Darkness, or even, you got Sam Neill, so you get a little bit of the Mouth of Madness too. But I say Prince of Darkness is actually really comparable. If you kind of take Prince of Darkness, the kind of the feel, the weirdness, the kind of narrative, it's kind of preposterously narratively, but it's also got these really memorable, weird, gory moments that still hold it together enough for you to go back and go I want to check that out again. So I feel the exact same thing of Prince of Darkness. That's not my favorite Carpenter, but there's a couple things in there that are just wow, that's awesome, So
absolutely.
And they both have this weird cosmic evil engine kind of going on in them,
Well, very, very Lovecraftian.
Yeah,
Very,
yeah, that
I'm a
too.
big
Yeah,
Lovecraft fan myself, and so it's very much kind of marrying the worlds of sci-fi and horror together, and kind of making them almost indistinguishable.
yeah.
Where what one person might call a ghost, another person might call something more science-based. So yeah, so that was an experience for me that to this day, I'll tell people, and I have friends who will laugh at me and be like, "That movie's ridiculous. It's cheesy. It's corny." And I don't disagree entirely, but
Right.
I think that was a really cool idea. In fact, recently, I think they're trying to do a Blu-ray release. I don't know if it's Shout Factory or somebody's trying to do something, and they're cobbling together as much footage as they can. And so there's been more and more kind of behind-the-scenes stories about it. And one of the bigger ones was that the original cut was a little bit longer, and when they showed it to test audiences, it was just too much. It included a lot more gore,
Right.
and which is really kind of unsettling. And ultimately, the studio's like, we can't put this out. Like, that's just not going to work. And so they had to trim a lot of that. And I think a lot of people who were involved with the film really kind of regret they didn't get to have those little extra things, whether it's I think an extended SOS scene
Mm-hmm.
or just it's interesting. Like just those kind of shocking set pieces can go a long way. Just some really cool effect or some really cool set design just makes something just stand out that much more. But so there's a lot of talk of like trying to get a hold of that footage, and from what I understand, it was stored somewhere in a salt mine or something, and the footage got ruined, but people are trying to find it.
That
So it'll
sounds
be
familiar.
interesting
I,
to
I
see what
remember
they put
hearing something like
together.
that too. I remember watching the DVD release. This would have been probably in the early thousands when everything was getting re-released on DVD, and they all had like,
Right.
you know, they all had commentaries and like, extended footage or whatever, missing scenes. And I feel like I remember hearing similar stories to
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying to that. And it kind of strikes me when you're talking about that. I wonder if studios are especially susceptible to space horror and cutting it down,
Mm-hmm.
because as opposed to say, I mean, you release a new Friday the 13th or release a new, Freddy movie. The expectation is
Mm-hmm.
audiences are going in, this is horror, they know what they're getting. So they don't, I mean, they'll cut it maybe for like extreme violence, but it'll stay pretty
Right.
gory throughout. Whereas I think back on Alien, the original Alien, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the original cut of Alien was like I think nearly 3 hours, if I remember correctly. And of course,
Yeah.
famously, there's the scene that they've kind of restored now, but famously they had left out the scene with a Dallas cocooned, and you've
Mm-hmm.
probably seen that by now, right? They show that footage now where
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ripley's like, it's one of the points where she's running back and forth and either starting or stopping the countdown, and all that stuff's happening, and she just
Yeah.
comes across his body cocooned, and he's like, kill me, and she flames him up. And basically they
Mm-hmm.
recreated that in Aliens, which
Mm-hmm.
made that kind of exist again now. Because I think before that, we never knew that they used them like cocoons like that. Like they use
Right.
them as like a living
Yeah.
host.
Right. I think that it's one of those things where, and it's a testament to just, regardless of how people feel about different cuts of things,
Right.
sometimes a theatrical cut isn't necessarily inferior to like a longer cut or a director's cut or something like that. It just creates a different mood, and it's interesting in that really it could just be a handful of seconds here or there or a scene here or there that really kind of changes a lot. Actually, to kind of
Yep.
bring it back around to what Sam was talking about when she was talking about Midsummer
Mm-hmm.
and getting to see the director's cut. And that was a really cool experience. Kind of getting, was the premiere was at I think it's called Scary Movie Fest or something like that. It's at the Lincoln Center in New York, and I liked the original cut. I thought it was a good movie, but I really liked the director's cut. It adds, I think, about 20 minutes or so, maybe 25 minutes of
Yeah.
footage, and it doesn't necessarily help the plot move along any faster or anything. But it really lays the groundwork for kind of how dysfunctional the relationship is, and a little bit more information about what's happening with the town around them, and so on and so forth. And I think that it almost like it creates not two separate movies, but two very distinct perspectives of the same
Yeah.
movie. So with Alien, and the same thing with Aliens, there's
Mm-hmm.
there's the director's cut of that as well too, where
Yep.
there's like they trim a lot of how these are like hardened Marines who just cannot seem to figure this thing out. Like it's just
Right.
it's too overpowering for them. And it does create a different atmosphere to the whole movie. And yeah, so I think that between a theatrical cut and an extended cut of Aliens, they're almost like two different things. Which is why I think whatever footage they can put together for Event Horizon would create a very different experience, or possibly not a very different, but a different experience. And I think back to with Nightbreed, where a few years ago they released the Midian cut, where the best of anyone's knowledge, Nightbreed was Nightbreed. It wasn't like there was all this footage laying around, and basically through a lot of work and effort, people were able to put together some footage that was here, some dailies that were there, and so on and so forth, and kind of re-edit and put it all together to create like the Midian cut for Nightbreed, which just adds just more.
Right.
And and I think that those missing bits and pieces here and there, they really can change things.
Yeah, I think that like what you're talking about, especially, so sometimes I think that I like the fact that a director is somewhat forced to be limited and have to really like make that storytelling work. But for some movies like Midsummer, with like we just talked about, I can see the advantage to both being there. And the thing I'm thinking of is obviously to market that movie. I mean, it's already 2.5 hours. It's a hard market to get even the studios to release it, even though he's getting a lot of acclaim and all this. It's like who's going to go watch this movie for 2.5 hours? So that alone makes sense. But and I think honestly, for the more average or middle of the road moviegoer, that cut is perfectly good. But for the fans or the super fans, which I think we probably are both somewhere in that range, we just want more of that world. Give us more of that world. We're good.
Right.
And if you want to give us more context, it's like, reading a book and you give us, an addendum or, some more information about that world. I mean, we're good to go. Well, give it to us. Strangely, I don't think I'd want that for Hereditary. I think Hereditary, I don't want extra in Hereditary because that isn't, to me, the experience of that isn't living in that world. It's that, it's the extreme, like, weird controlled, like, destiny that we're going to watch with these characters. And I don't think I need that to expand out. Whereas with Midsummer, it's definitely like an environment that you're in. And it's like, well, it's like Wizard of Oz, like we talked about, you're in Oz. Like, show me some more of Oz.
Right. Yeah. The thing with Hereditary, from what I understand, there's a 3-hour cut, or there's initially a 3-hour cut. And it has a lot more to do with Gabriel Byrne's character. So it's much more, I think, approaching from the psychological, because he's a psychologist. I think he's a psychologist in the movie. It's more of a psychological perspective of that, because there's kind of an element to where there's talk of mental illness being a pretty prevalent role in Hereditary. And there's a lot of, I kind of have to agree with people who have argued that, like, if you take out all the supernatural elements of Hereditary, it's still a very difficult, very psychologically evocative sort of movie. It's about grief, and grief's psychologically evocative. And so I think that kind of approaching it more from, like, why are these characters feeling this way? Why are they behaving that way? It would add something different to it that, in the end, I don't think it would make it the same movie. I think it would be very different in a lot of ways, too. But yeah, I mean, it kind of brings me back around to what I was saying before, was that those things can really change a movie, really change the narrative, and really kind of connect the dots. I'm also a big Blade Runner. There's about like 2 dozen versions of Blade Runner.
Yes.
And they're all kind of distinct, and they never quite finish the same way, or kind of cap off the way that you think they would, or they're very distinct. And so I think that would, I agree that the Hereditary, I like it the way it is. I'd be interested to see a longer cut, just because I like that movie.
Same.
Yeah.
I think
but I don't know exactly what it's going to add.
Well, that seems to be Ari's like working process. He seems to plan, like that's what he's saying about his next movie, right? He seems to plan on making a 4-hour cut And that's what he starts with. But to me, that's a testament of, and I could see Kubrick doing something similar to that too. You know, if you were to let Kubrick, you know, except I think what Kubrick does differently is he'll do like 100 takes to get the one he wants.
Right.
So the filming process might take extra long. But what I was going to say about Ari, I think what he's doing is it's a testament to how he's creating a very rich world. Like he knows what this whole world is. He knows what all these characters are about. He has a full background set up for them. And you feel that, and then he cuts it down and shows you part of that. So he could show it all to you, but he's showing you part of it. And that's where, you know, he's giving you the director's eye and he's telling you what he wants you to see about them. But I think that's why people go back and back and back, and like how he'll put in all the little weird, you know, clues and touches and little Easter eggs if you want to find them and all that kind of stuff. But that all just adds to the fact that he's thought about it in like 10 different angles. And whereas I would guarantee there's some movies that are much lesser where there would no way to have a 3 or 4 hour cut, because they don't know enough about their characters to be able to do that. They've decided this is the bad guy and this is the good guy and this is the, you know, damsel in distress and this is the evil.
Right.
You know, it's all tropes. Like Michael Bay, he makes it longer with more explosions and bullshit.
Right. And there is an art form to that as well too. But I agree. I think that Ari Aster makes very cerebral movies. Same thing with, you know, Robert Eggers as well too.
Yep.
Where, I mean, what's happening on screen is one thing, but how characters are experiencing it and reacting to it is something entirely different. And I think that that's a testament to, I mean, it's tapping into something that just is just much more than just kind of your technical film sort of process, not just blocking and this is the aspect ratio and this is the thing happening. You're really trying to evoke a response out of that audience. And the audience can't respond if they don't know what people are feeling. And so I think that that's kind of where those sorts of those like 2.5 hour run times and long stretches of kind of exposition and just kind of filling the audience in. That's where I think that comes from. But in the end, you kind of feel what Toni Collette's character is going through in Hereditary. You kind of feel, what's happening in Midsummer, and also, like I said, with Robert Eggers, the same thing with The Witch, where you kind of it's not just a witch. It's how this witch is literally, kind of pulling this family apart if they're not doing it themselves. And that just takes nuance. I think that just takes time to kind of do.
Well, I think I had mentioned this. I don't know if I had mentioned this to Samantha or somebody else, but I think that especially with Ari Aster, but with Eggers, it's a little different. I think where he's playing with almost like archetypal folk tales or archetypal like types of periods and twisting them and giving them a really unique like version of those. At least so far, that's what he's done. And it sounds like the next one's going to be something similar too. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the Guys in the Lighthouse, Salem Witches, not really, but you know what I'm saying? Like that kind of really, really archetypal things. Whereas Ari Aster seems to be doing something to me where he's very much into, so far, and even his shorts, I think, feel like they do this too, is he's really, really into relationship dynamics, but then presenting them in really disturbing and horrific kind of settings. And he really messes with, I think, audience expectations. And to me, his are very, very much mirrors. Like they really force you to see what you're bringing to the table, how you read it. And a perfect example, and both of those do it. Right. Like you think Toni Collette's character, some people say like, oh, she's a terrible mother and blah, 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 blah. Whereas I look at the movie and I say like, she is trapped in hell. And she has lived her whole life thinking that she's either crazy or terrible. She thinks that about herself without knowing that she's basically one of her own little puppet dolls in somebody else's diorama. I mean, that's to me the whole concept of the movie, right? That they're all puppets. They don't know it. And it's causing them to go crazy because they don't understand that they're basically just puppets. And when she finally discovers that, it breaks her, And then Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say a lot of it, I think, is it's about betrayal and the feelings behind betrayal, but it's one person's betrayal versus inversely why that betrayal happened in the first place. And in terms of Hereditary, she feels betrayed by her mother. Well, it also is her mother was. We can talk about spoilers and stuff.
Oh yeah. This is like
Okay. Her mother's part of this cult that is kind of, you kind of have to do terrible things in the name of like success and kind of and attaining the things you want. And so I think the son feels betrayed by her, but she's just trying to protect him as best as she knows how to, which she doesn't really know how to. In terms of like her Midsummer, it's Danny feels that she's betrayed by her boyfriend, but he was, I mean, for all intents and purposes, he was drugged and raped. Like those are people are betraying people, but it's not entirely coming from a place of malice, and that's what makes it even more bizarre. It'd be one thing if somebody was doing something awful in the name of like, well, I'm doing something awful because I like you. But somebody does something awful because they love you or because they didn't really have much of a choice. That just makes it that much more unsettling and just uncomfortable. I agree with you. I think Eggers and Ari Aster kind of have very different approaches into like, it's very cerebral movies, but they're coming from different places. Actually, I don't know if you listen to a lot of podcasts. A24 put out a podcast where they interviewed each other, and it's very entertaining.
They talk about their movie influences and stuff, and that's really fun to listen to.
Yeah.
And then I say, but it's a really golden time for a lot of this stuff too, because you get two directors like that. Jordan Peele's doing his own thing, which is also its own whole weird world of dealing with racial stuff, but also like classic horror, but also like surrealistically, almost like mad scientist horror in a way, like in some of his movies, if you think about it, which is really a really strange thing that he throws in both movies. There's this kind of this weird sci-fi element, which is unusual. And then I would add in, oh God, I get her name, Jennifer Kent, and she's doing the Babadook, and then she does the Nightingale, which is super different. I don't know if you've seen the Nightingale. And there's another,
I have not yet, but yeah.
Oh my God! And there's another interesting voice, but she's doing something, a whole other level of something from another side of the world there, So it's a good time for really interesting revisionist like genre movies. And honestly, I feel like we might be on the wave of the next like auteur kind of explosion, which we haven't had since the 70s, So
the new Hollywood. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I
go ahead.
No, what were you gonna say?
No, go ahead.
Oh, well, no, I was just saying, I think that right now there is a tremendous platform for a lot of these sorts of films to kind of not just get made, but also have like a distribution channel to a lot of audiences they would have never really had one. I think A24 is in being involved in some of the most interesting films that are being made right now. And they just always seem to find, I mean, on almost every interesting movie, it ends up being an A24 movie. There's something that they identify with in terms of very talented, but kind of, I guess indie would be the word, but I'd say lower budget, mid-budget sort of movies. They just really identify with that. And Blumhouse has a very different approach, but still very involved in terms of maybe not entirely the auteur angle, but they like making movies. They just want to make as many movies as they can.
Me, if I were to
Shudder's handling distribution as well too.
Yeah, Shudder is awesome. I am a big proponent of Shudder, because Shudder. Okay, here's the way I'll kind of line it up if I can describe this. I don't know if it'll make sense. So for me, you got Blumhouse. Blumhouse is kind of like Hammer to me, like Hammer Films, if you know Hammer Films. Whereas like they're producing like kind of mainstream, but they're doing a pretty consistent job of it. You know what you're going to get. It's not going to usually push the envelope too much. Although every so often you'll get a Invisible Man, that's a little bit like, whoa, that was a little bit more than I expected from Blumhouse. Then you get A24, and A24 is like, they're just like gobbling up the auteurs, but I mean, you've also got, I was just thinking about it, you've got Safdie brothers in there. You've got, and I can't think of his name, but the dude who does a Ghost Story, and now he's just about to put out The Green Knight this year. So
yeah.
They're creating
and Jeremy Saulnier, I think.
Oh yeah,
right.
I mean,
he's now Green Room and Blue Ruin.
I can't think of a studio that's had this much identity, like positive identity, before the Miramax. We don't talk about them anymore. But
true.
But the difference is, I think Miramax was known for like finding these things, but then really getting their hands in it, both horribly and we'll talk about that whole thing. But these guys
Harvey Scissorhands.
Yeah. That's right.
That was but I know he's a pretty appalling person, but that was the nickname.
No, I know, because he would get in there and edit them and all that.
Movies.
They were like a promotion machine, but they also had an eye for sure.
Yeah.
Whereas A24 seems to be like, you guys are awesome. Do what you do. You know, you're awesome. Do what you do.
Very hands off. Yeah.
And they're
Blumhouse too.
Yeah, true. But I just feel like it's like the eye is a little different, right? You know, that they're giving to that. Anyway, I think that's a really good way to look at it. And like you said, it's a very it's kind of an exciting time. And I think that we're seeing, with the actual world being so horrible right now, art is going to come out of this. And I don't think it's an accident that we're getting some super subversive, some super creative, and really awesome art coming out of this. And I guess, and I could be wrong, but I guess we're going to look back at some of these with a very different light, 10 or 15, 20 years from now, that we're going to look at a Hereditary and go like, oh, whoa, evil older cult that was destroying people's lives to get fame and fortune. That could have a political side to it too. Stupid, unfeeling Americans that go to another culture and see it as evil and don't understand what they're getting. So if you want it, that's there too. And that the fact that you're getting all of these layers that are like just mirroring like relationships, emotional stuff, human life, and political stuff, that's fucking great in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it's a lot of creativity in the sense that, well, so there's those kind of movies that are really speaking to higher minded things, but there's still, and I'm a huge horror fan, but I love B movies and kind of splatter movies and stuff like that. The kind of the technical skills and the kind of things that are happening with the more kind of lower budget sort of grindhouse movies and stuff, that's really impressive too, in terms of things like this year I saw VFW, which I totally loved. I thought that was a totally fun movie it's a total popcorn movie. Everybody's having fun. They're just kind of, it's just buckets of blood and gore and stuff all over the place. But it's done in such a very technical manner, and really good filmmaking. Despite, just synthesizers and explosions and stuff like that. And so I think that there's kind of a duality there. There's these kind of high-minded horror movies, and then all the kind of low-budget stuff you'd watch late at night and have fun with. That's also really good too. It's really technical. Yeah. Whereas a lot of older B movies, the creativity was there, but the technical skills weren't. You could see the strings pulling this thing, or the thing didn't go off at the right time, or the editing is just like baffling. But we're at a place now where like even the bad films have really good filmmakers. Yeah. And it's kind of saturating market with a lot of stuff. We've only talked about film. We haven't even mentioned television. And like how television is a huge part of this as well too. There's so many really interesting shows out there now tackling things that things like Westworld and what they've been kind of trying to do, and True Detective, and just kind of really there's a lot of tremendously good material right now. And just a problem is finding it.
Yeah, everyone pushes out, promotes out like the beginning of it as being like Sopranos and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, Breaking Bad, of course, Breaking Bad like blew it out the water. But I mean, I think what you're saying too, like Patriot, if you've seen Patriot, that's an amazing one. I don't know if you're aware of that one at all. That one's incredible, and it's a terrible title, so no one watches it. And I don't know if you've watched Devs. Devs was really amazing this year.
I wanted to see it. I had a friend who started and liked it, and I meant to check it out.
Devs is like, to me, probably, and it does some similar stuff to what the last season of Westworld did, but I think it does it more interestingly because you've got that's another one we didn't talk about. What's his name? It's gonna kill me. The dude that did Ex Machina and Annihilation.
Alex Garland.
Alex Garland. So that's Alex Garland's baby. And Devs is just essentially, I mean, it's a little bit stretched out because it's a series, but it's like eight or 9 episodes. It's not that long. And that's it. It's like a oneer. It's not going to continue. Yeah. If it does, it'll be a different story. There's no way this wouldn't continue.
Right.
And
that's kind of how I felt about Westworld. Like that. Well, I was going to say that first season really tells that story. And I haven't seen the second or third season just because people who told me about it, they like it, but it just isn't. It's just a different story than that first.
I've heard the same, and
was very much.
From what I've heard, the third season, I haven't watched it, but what I've heard, the third season goes along similar issues as Devs. So I would say, from what I know, only have seen Devs, watch Devs. But Devs is like probably the most heady sci-fi that I've seen on television, maybe ever. I mean, it gets into like quantum theory that will just blow your brain away. And then you throw in, some great actors in there. And a thing that blew me away about it, and we'll move along, but things that blew me away about it, it's like they have this machine in the devs unit, which I won't describe exactly what it is, but it has to do with quantum theory. And I'm like, well, that's a pretty looking, awesome looking sci-fi machine, but it's just it's Hollywood's version of a sci-fi machine. And then I went and looked up quantum machines. There are quantum machines that are being worked on, and they look very similar. They look like a brass and copper hipster coffee machine, like a giant hipster coffee machine, very Keurig. Okay. Very very steampunk or something, but also gleaming and probably made with like wooden tools from the 1800s.
That's how you know it's authentic.
Exactly. You gotta, if you don't have your sparrow tattoo while you're doing it, you're in trouble. You gotta make sure everything's right on point there. And that Eggers goes down that path for sure, right? I mean, he uses his ancient lenses, but goddamn, is it beautiful? And that's the thing that I hate the thing about generations, because as an older than you person, so as a middle-aged or older than middle-aged person, I hate that a lot of people in my era are like, those kids don't know when I was a kid, blah, 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 some version of that, right? And the same thing, like hipsters, blah, blah, blah. And, okay, there are a lot of things that can be annoying about hipsters, but also look at what the fuck they make. Some of the shit they make is awesome. So it's like in a generation, you've got the hippies. Let's take the hippies. Let's take the punk rockers. That's where I came from. 85% of them are just annoying fashion posers. But there's that 15 or 20% who are hardcore, who are making some really weird, interesting art from that era. And that's what you got to look for. So
right, absolutely. I think it's people that get very excited and very passionate about something to the point where it's kind of hard to articulate to other people. Like in that interview, that A24 interview with Robert Eggers and Ari Aster, they're both talking about like German expressionism film and the different aspect ratios, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's like a German film about mine and miners being trapped in a mine. And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, I had the Criterion Channel for a while. I'm okay. Like, I don't need to go down this rabbit hole. But then as you're watching The Lighthouse, you're like, I totally get it. Like, I kind of understand what he's trying to convey and how like everything feels kind of squeezed and nothing feels very. I mean, for people being on an island, it feels very suffocating.
Yes.
And so I think it's people that feel very passionate about something that it's hard to listen to them kind of talk about it, which is why they get to do it through film and show how they, and demonstrate what they're talking about as opposed to talking about it. And I think that's kind of the thing with in the whole hipster argument is that you're right. More often than not, it's somebody that's just kind of talking about somebody else's idea. but some of those ideas are coming from a place of such kind of uh, excitement and passion that it just wouldn't. It kind of has to funnel through other people to get to you.
It's just it's just the idea of nerd culture. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Whatever your nerd style is, and I'm sorry, sports fanatics, you're also nerds. Get over it. You are. It's just a different. It's just a different. Yeah, it's just a different fandom. The people who are hardcore into it and really get down into that level and produce something based on that, you're gonna see it, and it's gonna have a validity and a genuineness to it that's gonna come out. And that's why you can watch Ari Aster, you can watch Eggers, and you could just geek the hell out of it. I mean, I made a video about all the secret stuff hidden in Midsummer, sure. And it gets like way more views than anyone else because everyone else wants to know all those little things and they all want to chime in. But
right, exactly, yeah.
But did you see this? Or like I was listening to, I listened to a middle class film class. I just started listening to that podcast. I've got too many podcasts to have time to listen to them all. And I listened to them going back and talking about Hereditary. And it was really fun because they're huge fans and they've seen it, each of them like 4 or 5 times or whatever. They're talking about all the little things that are hidden in there. And I was like, but did you know that when her paint gets knocked over, if you watch it in slow motion, she doesn't knock it over? You know, stuff like that. I don't know if you knew that, but it's true. But if you watch it, she doesn't knock it over.
Yeah. Right. And there's a lot of weird things. And I think that, have you seen the movie Room 237?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of things in that where, in terms of the people who make these films are, I mean, they're perceptive people. So there's no accidents. Like, they kind of really seal it. Now, I think 237 goes a bit too far. I think there's some people that are connecting dots that just aren't there, quite frankly. But, I mean, there's a lot of things that are very deliberate, and especially a movie like The Shining, where there is I think Kubrick as a whole does what I would call very deliberate filmmaking. That is very measured, very paced in a way that is uncomfortable. I think for me, the thing that is so uncomfortable about The Shining is that people just kind of do this thing where they speak very slowly. And it's never just like a casual conversation. It's not like what we're having right now. We're just talking about stuff. Everything is very slow. Everybody is like staring at each other as they're talking about it. And everything is just very, very measured and deliberate. And that's uncomfortable. Like, there's nothing natural about that. So the whole movie is just these people talking at each other instead of talking to each other.
And a lot of times they're looking right at you when they're doing it. Like, a lot of times
from
he
where
does it as like a POV shot. So even when it's like, hey, Doc, do you ever, you know, that kind of stuff? Or that, you know, light of my life, you know, it's all like looking at you and you're like, what the fuck? You know?
Right. Yeah, exactly. You're like, just be normal. Like, just have a conversation, be normal people. But no one's normal in that movie. Like, it just doesn't make sense to have, you know, normal people in that situation.
Well, and that's the thing of seeing, you know, what makes his movies so awesome in the sense that they're so impeccable, but they're also so controlled, you know, and it's controlled in the making, as like we were talking about how many takes he does, or how he was basically like mentally breaking down. God, I can't think of her name. You know, Wendy, whoever played Wendy, I can't think of her name all of a sudden. Shelley Duvall. How he's basically like emotionally breaking her down and telling her she's a shitty actress all the time and making her do the same, you know, crying scene like 100 times. So, but what I'm saying is, this is kind of an example of where, I mean, what works in his movies is that it is so much him, his personality is on the screen. The control of the incredible, like, strict symmetry of everything, you know, and everything's a push in or a pull out, and everything is hard geometry. I mean,
it's front and center.
It's like the opposite of Gaspar Noé. Like, everything in Gaspar Noé is a circle. Everything is swirling and like zooming and swooping and you know, that's Kubrick. He's going to come at you or go back from you, you know, and it's like, or he's going to go side by side. And that's all you're going to get.
and nothing else can kind of take your attention away from that. Whereas with like Gaspar Noé, like I'm trying to look for things in the background because because what's being framed is kind of in the front and the left. So I keep looking to the back and the right, like something's going to happen, and then nothing might happen.
Well, he's going to give you
everything.
Gaspar can sit on one thing, but a lot of times he's going to give you a chaotic scene, and he's going to like flow through it, and you get to kind of poke stuff out, and then he'll stop occasionally and show you someone's head getting smashed in with a, you know, with a thing. Yeah. But then he'll go away for a while and come back and swoop around and give you a brown note underneath it.
It's disorienting. I think they're both kind of. What's interesting is because I think with The Shining is a very disorienting film, just as I think Climax is a disorienting film.
Yeah.
And that they're coming at it from completely opposite angles. Whereas just like everything is so front and center that you feel uncomfortable, like you're in the front row of this whole watching this family collapse. Whereas in Climax, it's like I don't know who's who. I can't see their face. The camera's moving. I'm looking in one direction and I'm looking in the other, and they're both just kind of like I don't feel like I totally know everything that's happening right now, and it kind of makes you uncomfortable, which is by design. I mean, that's the point.
Right.
It's just kind of cool. There's two different things. I recently just watched like 2001, and to me, to think of like when that movie came out, and here we are, just decades and decades later, and it's just still like that good and that like awe-inspiring, and just shots in there that are like, I don't know how that happened. I mean, I'm
even little shots,
genius, so I'm sure.
Even little shots like when early on when you're just sitting there and there's that pen in the air, the pen floating in the air, and they just grab that pen. Yeah. You're like, and I know how they did that shot, but
yeah, where it's like it doesn't make. I mean, like you could think back, okay, well now you'd have a CGI pen, or you would, there could be some sort of, you could use drones to kind of accomplish certain things in terms of camera work, but to look at it now and be like, I don't know how somebody sat down and put that entire thing together. Like it looks as phenomenal now as it did then. Like it just is unreal.
But that's the insanity of Kubrick, though. So he's like, he's the kind of guy who'll be like, Nolan kind of wants to be him, right? But I mean, Stanley Kubrick could be the kind of guy like, okay, well, to do the shot, I'm going to have to invent a new lens. Can we get some scientists on that, please? And he'll do it.
Right.
He's like, I don't have lenses fast enough to shoot my entire movie by candlelight. Can we make that happen, please?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a difficult thing to aspire to. And I think that, I think it's good to aspire to those things, but I don't know who's ever going to no one can replicate that. Like nobody could, because everybody's distinct. They kind of have their own voices when it comes to those sorts of things. But I'd like to see people try. I mean, it's fun to watch when somebody really kind of throws their hardest punch to see if they can kind of make it work. And it's not going to land, but it's gonna be an interesting effort nonetheless.
Well, the thing is, you're not going to see where it's going to come. It's going to surprise you because it's not going to be what you think it's going to be. It's going to be something that you weren't expecting.
Right.
It's kind of funny when you're talking about Noé and Kubrick and the two kind of like different approaches to the same thing they take. I had a thought, and I don't know, this is a weird connection, but I was thinking about how that's sort of representational of the time period, having lived in both time periods. And I think about it, to me, I relate it to music. So I think of back when I was into like punk rock and underground music in the early 80s, no internet, none of that stuff, right? So you had, and Kubrick is kind of that. Kubrick is like, he's presenting this like kind of this wasteland of stuff. It's very spare, very sparse, and you have to find that thing. And then it's like you had to find a way to get that music. Whereas Noé is like now. Noé is like, you have everything. It's all like music. Look at music now. There's so much music, it's hard to pick out what is the good music. So in a sense, he's kind of doing that. He's giving you this chaos, not always, but in a lot of his stuff. He's giving you this chaos and this craziness, and he's going through there.
Oversaturation.
Yeah, he's going through there and forcing you to like find what the meaning is in that. And he's giving you a little bit direction, but he's also kind of letting you do some of the looking. So I think to me, it kind of represents sort of a different a difference of how we consume media, you know, in a sense.
Yeah.
And you see that Enter the Void. You see that in like all of his stuff, pretty much. So
yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a good observation on a lot of fronts for that. In that they're distinct, but they're accomplish kind of similar goals, and it does have a lot to do with the world around us. Like I think that kind of the idea of like with Noe, kind of there's just so much kind of overstimulation, just input everywhere, and you're kind of searching for anything to hook on to kind of make sense. Like that can be. That's why a lot of people will try to argue, or not argue, but they'll classify Climax as like a horror movie. Which, I mean, there's some horrific things that happen, but I don't know if it's entirely a horror movie until you watch it. You're like, oh my God, what's happening to these people? Like, this is just so chaotic, and no one seems to really know what's going on, and people are kind of descending to like, very much
madness, or
it kind of reminded me of that Chuck Palahniuk book Haunted, where it's like people just kind of descend into like the worst versions of themselves.
Oh yes,
and,
right. That's true too.
Yeah, and so just watching it, it's like, okay, that is horror. Like that's I mean, and once it could just be about a bunch of dancers getting dosed on acid, or it could be watching people literally devolve into the worst of themselves.
True. Yes. There. I think that's it, and I think that actually goes in because the beginning has the interviews of them when they're all interviewing, like what they're all about, and I think that is kind of key to what you're saying, because there you're kind of presenting your public self, right? Like that's what you want that interviewer.
That's as good as it's going to get.
Yes, that's what you want the interviewer to know about you, whatever that is. But then you see the other side of it, which is like everything's stripped away, which is another interesting thing about Noe. He is really into trying to actually induce like altered states in his audiences too, right?
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
Famously, he's got the tones he's trying to use in Irreversible. He's trying to use I forget what it is, like as I don't know if it's the brown note, but it's one of those. It's supposed to induce like anxiety, not shit, but anxiety.
Yeah, right. Well, it's so I actually have that soundtrack. The soundtrack was done by Thomas Bangalter, who's one half of Daft Punk. And I'm a big Daft Punk fan too.
Sure.
And you're right. There's things tonally that are. Well, I think the one track is called Rectum.
Yes, when they're going into the rectum.
Kind of yeah, and it's just like wah, wah, like that kind of, and it just keeps getting louder and then softer, but then really loud and then softer, and it's just the same kind of tones over and over again. But those are really unsettling.
And then the title sequence of Enter the Void is supposed to give you like an epileptic seizure, right? I mean, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it is, and that's kind of a difficult thing to accomplish. Like I know that Sam had mentioned before about kind of the imagery in Midsummer being kind of like showing what hallucinating would be, and some filmmakers and a lot of times it's just like, you know, the voices are pitched down and there's a bunch of colors all over the place, but it's just much more than that in terms of to really get the sense of like an altered perspective. There's just more going on.
Yes.
And yeah, he's the filmmaker that kind of accomplished it.
Because he's lured you into it too. Like I remember when I wrote a review of that right after Midsummer came out, and it's really hard to do because it hasn't sat with you. I mean, it sat with me for like, I don't know, less than a day when I wrote it. But I still think I kind of stand by my like final line was something like, what have I been indoctrinated into, you know? Because in a sense, by the end of it, you're like, to me, now I don't know, everyone else has their own little take on it, but to me, I'm like with Danny, I'm like, yeah, we got the right place. We're here.
Yeah.
I feel happy right now.
I think, yeah, right. At the end, I think is when she's finally kind of untethered. I think that there's no reason to go back. There's nothing to go back to.
But I think like you're saying, like
home.
They have a few hallucinatory stuff like early on. There's a little like hint of it, right, with them in the field and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time you get it for real, like in the last 20 minutes, you are seasoned for that, you know. So that it should
Right.
really work on you. So that when that one dude like claps in the face of Christian, you're just like, oh,
Hmm.
oh no,
Yeah.
you know, this is not
Right.
good.
Well, I think the one of the kind of main, if not the main component of a lot of that stuff is that you have to be aware that your perspective is altered. It's one thing to kind of be, like I was saying before, pitched on voices and lights all over the place. You're like, okay, well, that looks strange. But when somebody is like actually aware that what I'm experiencing is not, in fact, what is actually happening, that's that extra little bit that makes it that much more kind of disorienting and kind of, well, depending on your perspective, really great or really bad.
And
And so I think
realistic to
that's
the actual experience.
and realistic, absolutely, yeah,
So
yeah.
when you
And so I think
see
that's why everybody kind of
Christian and Danny act the way you should act, like they're acting like,
right.
okay, what's going on here,
They're kind of scared, and then there's moments when they're okay with it, and there's moments, especially Florence, like Florence Pugh was phenomenal in that movie, just like unreal, and especially was towards the end with the like the dance, the maypole scene or whatever. Like it's just kind of going back and forth between being very afraid that she's not certain what's going on, but very happy that she feels so good. And it's just kind of this oscillation back and forth. And Christian he's mostly just scared for the
Yeah.
last third of the movie, but still just really, into his credit, that was Jack O'Connell. I might
Oh,
have the
who
name
plays
wrong though.
Christian?
Yeah,
Jack Rayner.
Jack Rayner. Okay. I
Yeah.
always mix him up with Jack O'Connell. But it's just just really conveying that, like, he's like, I know that what I'm seeing is not real, and I just want to get back to whatever kind of reality that
And
what
that's
actually is happening.
consistent for his character, though. His character is he doesn't get it, right? Like the whole idea is the
Right.
whole
Mm-hmm.
movie, he knows what's going on in the moment in a factual way, but he doesn't
Mm-hmm.
get it. Like there's moments throughout the
Right.
movie, just some cuts you can see where it's like where he's saying something and then Danny says something and you just look at Danny's face and she's like so disappointed because he doesn't get
Right.
it. You know?
Right. Yeah.
And
And there's a ton of that in the director's cut. There's a lot of moments of that where it's like, I mean, not to kind of belabor the point, but it's just kind of like, wow, like what buddy, what are you doing? Like, what are you thinking right now?
yes, that's what's so effective about it is it really empathizes with a situation that is super common in relationships and in just in life, but isn't really represented
Mm-hmm.
in that subtle of a way on film a lot of times. A lot of times it's like said by the
Right.
characters to each other, whereas
Mm-hmm.
here he just lets it happen. And he lets it happen with Christian's character throughout, like how Christian deals with, and I forget his name, how I call him Cheaty because I know him from The Good Place,
Yeah.
but how he relates to him and just doesn't get it. Like, why is he upset with me for taking his, his idea?
Right.
You know,
There's just some people that are just that aloof. Like, I
yeah.
mean, it just they're just doing their thing.
And
Everybody else just happens to be in the way.
it's an essential like narcissism too, right? Like that basically
Right.
like, well, I want to do this, so why shouldn't that be a good thing? It's
Right.
me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Look at me, man.
It's like, I'm just gonna do this thing. It shouldn't be your problem. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
It's yeah. It's and he Jack Rayner had a really great performance in that too. It's one of those instances where everybody does a really great job, but somebody does such an exceptional job that it's kind of hard to notice all these other things that are happening.
well. I
I
will
think
just go
when it
ahead.
comes to kind of
No, go ahead.
I
Go
was
ahead.
going to say, when it comes to cerebral movies like that, like, um, one false note can kind of unthread the whole thing. I think whenever you have films like that, like when you have people emotionally conveying things back and forth to each other, they all kind of have to be on the same page. And there's films where that works really well and films where it doesn't. Like, I think parallel to a lot of Hereditary stuff is Ordinary People, and
Mm.
everyone in Ordinary People kills it. Like that, it is arguably maybe some of the best acting of a lot of those people's
Oh
careers,
yeah.
in a very storied career. But then there's moments where you'll have, these kind of, there's this tension that's trying to be built, but it just doesn't quite thread the needle. Like, it doesn't quite there's this thing's not working or that thing's not working, or it just doesn't kind of come. Like an example for me, I think like American Hustle, right, which isn't really a cerebral movie, but like there's a lot of really good performances, and then there's some flat performances.
Sometimes it feels a little bit like wearing a wig. Like sometimes it feels like a little bit like they're just, like wearing a costume.
Right. I'm just gonna be this weird person for now, and it's like, meanwhile, other people are capital A acting and you're lowercase a acting, and everybody kind of has to be on board at the same time. Although people would argue American Hustle has a great cast, but I think I wasn't entirely sold on all of the.
It's a fun movie, but it's kind of you're right. There's a level of cartoonishness to it that doesn't.
Right.
It comes across as play acting a little bit, as opposed to characters, like actual lived characters. Right. And that's where I think something like Ari Aster or even Eggers, like we're talking about, what they're doing that's a little special is they're giving us performances that you would see, like super lived-in performances, super genuine performances that you'd almost see in a non-visual movie, like a Woody Allen movie or like Ordinary People or something like that. Whereas like those movies are very actory, but very like genuine, but they're also not visually or thematically like very expansive. They're pretty much just people in rooms. Yeah, they're people in rooms, like which is its own thing and is great. But when you can take that and then put that into, The Witch or The Lighthouse or Hereditary or Midsummer, where you've got this whole visual element to it, that's pretty remarkable. And that's where I think that you get next level filmmaking happening, where you have both things. And honestly, I mean, problematic director, but Roman Polanski is someone who could do that too, like in his best works. In his later works, not so much. But if you're looking at like Rosemary's Baby or Repulsion or Chinatown, I mean, you got some incredible performances and some really interesting visual movies going on. So,
yeah, and just kind of an eye for that kind of uncomfortable, disorienting kind of thing. That kind of that element of like. Nothing ever is. I mean, there's obviously a very superficial level as to what's happening, but there's things underneath that you don't want to go anywhere near.
Yes,
but you have to, because you're the audience and you have to take it. So that's kind of where you are. Like for me, like my favorite film of all time, since I think I saw it when I was 5, is Night of the Living Dead. I'm also from Pittsburgh, so it's kind of a bias, I guess.
A great movie.
But. Yeah, and so every time I watch that movie, I feel I get something different from it every time as to why it's so impactful, and especially as you age and get older. When I was a little kid, it's a zombie movie. And as a teenager, I'm like, oh, it's about people struggle against each other. Then you get older, and it's about racism. And it gets older, and you can kind of pull all these different pieces together from it. And the last time I watched it, the thing for me was that and one of the reasons I love it, and I think why the reason a lot of people love it, it's so confrontational. Like it is a confrontational movie in that it gets in your face and says, this is what's happening. And there's actually a documentary called Birth of the Living Dead where they interview George Romero. And the interviewer tells, and I love this moment in the documentary where he tells Romero, he goes, yeah, you're pretty relentless with your audience. And he goes, oh, there's always a snack bar. And I always thought that was such a cool line to say that, like, here's my story. You're welcome to watch or go find something else to do. It's entirely up to you. And not often do you get somebody who's going to do that. It reminded me a lot of, we talk about punk and stuff, punk music. Like, the first time I listened to Raw Power from Iggy Pop was, that to this day might be the most confrontational album I've ever heard. Like, it sounds like Iggy Pop is, like, yelling at me as I'm listening.
Well, even that production on that album is so raw and like bright.
Yeah. Right. And it's just, but the thing of that though is that confrontation doesn't necessarily have to be negative. Like it's not trying to push you away. It's trying to get a response out of it.
It's challenging.
So to me, that's like for Night of the Living Dead. Right. Exactly. And kind of born of those challenges and those confrontations, there's a deeper relationship, deeper sense of intimacy with those sorts of things. There's people that experience things like that in terms of film that are so, I don't know, it pushes them and then they push back. And now you both pushed into each other. So now you're, that's kind of a part of it. And for me, that's the thing for Night of the Living Dead, was just, it just doesn't flinch, doesn't blink, and it just comes after audiences, and
it's
a lot of people ran away,
low
but a
budget.
lot more ran to it.
Yeah, it was so low budget. I mean, but I go back, if you get a good print of it, unfortunately, because it's kind of semi-public domain, you get all varying degrees of prints of that movie. But there are some really good prints.
I think there is a new, they have the Blu-ray print that came out. Actually, I went to, when they were a few years ago in Pittsburgh, when I was still living there, they had like a 4K restoration of it that I think is not in public domain. I think there's still other I don't know the entire rights, which is just a nightmare, movie rights.
Yeah.
But I think the 4K, they were able to get the rights to that, and that's like the definitive kind of restoration version. I'm sure you can still publish your own copy of.
And I'm struck by how good it looks for such a low budget movie. And I get that same thing when I watch a good print of the original Evil Dead or the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Those all look great. And I just said, I mean, for me with Night of the Living Dead, I mean, the whole movie is good, but the opening of driving up those roads and going into the cemetery and the whole thing with the sister and the brother, I mean, I love that so much. I love it so much. I mean, it's some of my favorite filmmaking of the time. And that time period, I mean, think about what he was doing. I don't know if you've seen Martin. He did Martin.
I have seen Martin, yes.
You know, that's very confrontational about religion and sexual identity in very early version of that. And of course, Dawn of the Dead is pretty infamous for its own thing. And even Day of the Dead somewhat, which is pretty flawed, but Day of the Dead really gets into 80s and stuff that's going on now. I'm honestly, that probably ages better than a lot of them. I love that. And it's kind of funny that that's your favorite movie. I would say I always go back, and I have a lot of, it's hard to say a favorite movie. The more movies you watch, it's like, what can be a favorite movie? But I always go back, and one of my favorite movies of all time is Harold and Maude. If you've seen Harold and Maude. And it's for similar reasons. I mean, it just that confrontation, the upending expectations, the idea of youth versus age and wisdom and pessimism versus optimism and just fucking it to the man. And there's just a lot of stuff in there it's the same stuff but in a different format. So I can really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think as much as it's very much in a similar way, like it's a story that you experience. And the thing is that the story never changes, but you do. And as a person. And so as you experience the same story over and over again, and you keep getting you're pulling different things from it, which sounds like that doesn't even make sense. How can you know the story inside and out, but every time you hear it, something else occurs to you? And I think that that's a testament to just kind of that attachment to that kind of material and just really loving and just embracing that material. I kind of swim in that pool all day.
I think that's your favorite movies should do that too. You should be able to go back. Sometimes you go back to them and they're just always the same thing. Like I always love Young Frankenstein, but it's always Young Frankenstein. Whereas I was thinking the other day, I was like, Return of the Living Dead is one of my other favorite zombie movies of all time, from the 80s. And I go back to that now and I watch it. And originally when I watched it, it was just goofy, fun, gory, punk rockers versus zombie movie. But now I watch it and it's like, to me, it's like one of the best movies about being in a shitty job. And if you watch it with that mindset, this kid on basically his first day on the job with these middle management, hellish boss, like immediate boss, and an even worse asshole boss. And that's the whole bullshit of the whole movie. It's all caused by terrible bosses. So it's almost like this really great movie about jobs. And when you look at it that way, God, that movie is so much fun. In just to think it was directed.
Yeah, there's the line in it when he's like, when the one boss is telling him, he's like, as they're fending off zombies, he goes, you'll bite your tongue if you want this job. And the kid's like, want this job? Like, are you kidding me? There's a lot of, I think horror comedies are difficult to do because they're either never exceptionally scary or exceptionally funny.
Right.
You kind of have to do both for it to work. And that one does it. Perfectly. In terms of the zombie stuff, the horror elements are scary. There's some genuinely scary things there. It is unbelievably funny. Like there are some hysterically just unreal moments in that movie that are so funny.
My favorite. You mean the movie Lied? When he's all pissed and it loves Night of the Living Dead. That movie loves Night of the Living Dead
Right.
so much that it says, well, we can't even do what Night of the Living Dead did. So we're going to say Night of the Living Dead was a true story.
Yeah. Well, it's based on a book. I think Russ Streiner wrote, Streiner wrote, or maybe not Russ Streiner. Might have been John Russo. I can't remember. Somebody wrote the book in the 70s, and then it bounced around. Dan O'Bannon adapted it in the 80s. Yeah. But I have a shirt that says "Send more paramedics."
Yeah, of course.
And people will see the shirt and they'll be like, "Oh, is that some sort of violent thing? Are you trying to be violent?" And I'm like, "No, it's a joke from a zombie movie." And they're like, "What's the joke?" I'm like, "Well, these zombies eat these paramedics, and then they get on the radio and say, 'Hello, dispatch, send more paramedics.'" And then people are cracking up afterwards. And there's just so many scenes of like little bits throughout that are just
Rabid Weasels, of course, is famous. Rabid Weasels.
Yeah.
And also another one. Talk about great jokes.
Or Unita,
or what's my temperature? Your room temperature.
Yeah.
It just
I like the second one too.
Yeah, I mean, this is a perfect example of, and we'll probably have to wrap it up soon because this is what I do. I can end up talking forever with people who are into movies, so this is what it is.
Me too.
But it's fun.
Yeah.
One thing I really like about that movie too is this is an example of, and I think there's a few of these where they go that extra step. So movies that are better than they needed to be. This movie didn't need to be as good as it is. So it'll do things like give you hints that mortician dude is a Nazi in hiding. There's lots of stuff in there that shows you he's a Nazi in hiding. You don't need that. They don't tell you. But if you want to see it, you can see it. You can hear the music he's listening to. He's got a Luger. Yeah. There's all kinds of weird shit. Or even little things like...
Even it's in German.
Little things like the scene where the one guy puts himself into the oven and then hangs his ring on the oven, the latch of the oven, and then puts himself in. Such great simple visual storytelling that doesn't need to be in this silly zombie movie, but it's there. Or even just like the soundtrack, of course. I mean, you got the Cramps on there. You got Rocky Erickson. If you know Rocky Erickson at all. Do you know Rocky Erickson? There's a documentary about his life. God.
Pieces.
There's a documentary. You should look it up. There's a documentary on the life of Rocky Erickson. He is one of the most fascinating musical individuals other than like Daniel Johnston. He's like equal to Daniel Johnston in weirdness. This is a guy who basically helped create psychedelic music as we know it and went to insane asylums because he was on acid, was forced into insane asylums, given shock therapy, destroyed as a person, and made this incredibly strange, weird music. He's like I can't even tell you. It's amazing. And he's just in this movie, just a song, there he is. So, yeah.
Well, and like you mentioned the Cramps and their show that they played for a bunch of patients at a mental institute, and people were trying to say, "Oh, you're just trying to exploit people," and they were very sincerely like, "We just want to play for people and just be as rowdy as we can be." And
the Cramps were the real deal, man.
Yeah, it's a great time.
And the Stooges were the real deal. Of course, the Stooges. Well, I should probably let you go, but you can we'll post this sometime. I'm banking these now. I've got like 3 or 4 of these banked, and I'll release them slowly as we go. But that's a lot of fun. Go ahead. What do you say?
I actually have a quick question for you. Are you on Letterboxd at all? I'm on Letterboxd too. So we should try to connect on Letterboxd as well. Yeah.
In fact, one of our things is
started writing reviews. I normally would just rate movies, but lately I've been writing reviews.
I'm on Letterboxd. I don't usually write reviews on there. I mean, I do a lot of movie reviews on my YouTube channel. Also, I don't know if you saw, but this is kind of an offshoot of Cinematics, and Cinematics was a really good podcast that I used to listen to, and one of the members of Cinematics came and joined me and some other people, and now we're doing, and Eric Holmes, and we're doing the movie Mainline thing. But one of the projects of Cinematics was that some of us were trying to watch 500 movies this year. So if you look at my my Letterboxd, it's pretty full.
Well, I was trying to do one a day, and then just moving recently, I kind of knocked a little off track with that. I'm at 141 right now.
Yeah, but that's good.
I think I can make up ground the second half.
Yeah, I mean, I probably realistically,
I'm talking about it like it's a game.
Yeah, I'll realistically end up somewhere in that, probably 350, 400 range. I mean, because I'm on 30 or something, but I mean, probably 30 or 40 of those are shorts, and I put shorts on there if I watch them too, which I don't, because once again, I don't care about a rule. I'm not like, oh, I've got whatever.
Right.
I mean, it's not like I'm getting an award for this. So, it's like it's just.
Well, hey, film is film, whether it's 3 hours or 10 minutes.
And I just love it. So, okay, this is where I can leave. We can leave on this. So last week, so every week on our podcast, each of us brings like 2 or 3 movies, usually streaming if possible, to the table. And last week, I challenged each of my co-hosts to have me watch a movie. So I was going to challenge for the next one I do. I was going to have some people that I've met on here and stuff. So what's a movie you think I should watch? And I'll see if I haven't seen it. If I haven't seen it within the last 30 years,
I'm gonna pull up. So something recent, a movie that I love.
If I haven't seen it in the last 30 years, I will watch it. But if I have seen it, I'll have to say, nope, got to give me another one.
I don't know. I struggle because there's a couple movies that I really. I like good movies, but I kind of like bad movies too.
Oh, I do too. I'm not a snob, believe me. I can watch some real trashy movies. Last year, 2 of my favorite movies were The Fanatic and Serenity.
Oh man, that Fanatic. That was. I just started to feel bummed after that. Let me take a look at what I'm thinking of. I really like this year. Can I give 2 recommendations?
Yeah.
Okay. I really like it's on Hulu right now. It's called Greener Grass.
I've seen it.
I think
it is good. I like it.
Oh, you've seen it?
Yep. And it's weird.
Yeah.
It's weird as fuck.
Did
you watch the other shorts? There's a
short.
No,
I hadn't seen the other shorts. It's based on a short. Yeah.
Well, there's their short, but there's another short the same 2 women did, because the 2 main women there are the directors and creators of that.
Right. They're all UCB people.
There's a really interesting other short they did. I'll have to see if I can find it to you, and I'll message it to you. Okay, what else you got to suggest? That's the hard thing, is I've seen a lot of movies.
Here's the thing that I kind of have to suggest, and you may have seen this, but have you seen Roar?
I have. And I've seen the documentary, The Most Dangerous Movie Ever Made. So
I finally saw Roar for the first time, and I could not believe it. The entire time I'm like, someone is like gonna get hurt. I'm trying to think of something else you haven't seen. You did mention you saw Blood Machines, which I really liked too.
I reviewed Blood Machines. Seth,
did you?
I'm trying to get I would love to get an interview with either Carpenter Brute or the guys that made Blood Machines, but they're really hard to find. But yeah, I reviewed them, and I got a lot of views on that because people, I think I called it glittering trash. I loved it. It was terrible, but great. Yeah. I
actually saw Carpenter Brute live before, and it's unreal. It's very much a soundtrack to even the concert. There's like stuff, and there's a lot of like kind of 80s B movies that are on screen. Even movies that I'm like I think Slaughter High was on like one of those clips that they were showing. I'm like, why do I know this stuff? I could know like physics or banking or something more, but nope, I can tell by like 2 frames of Slaughter High that's what's on.
Some weird giallo. They'll pick some weird giallo movie.
Yeah, right.
Have you ever seen
Verotika? I assume.
You know what? I've seen reviews of Verotika, but I haven't actually watched it.
Oh well, do yourself a favor.
Yeah, I know pretty well what it is. I'll make you listen to Elvis him singing Elvis, this new album.
It is something else. Like it really is, as much as it's as bad as everybody says it was. I kind of went in being like, okay, he's not a professional director.
If you're going to make me watch Verotika, have you? I might force you to watch something. Let's see. First of all, have you seen? I'm going to give you something to watch. A couple things. First of all, have you ever seen Glenn Danzig introduce his book collection?
Is that the one where he says he has a book about being a werewolf?
Yeah, it's in black and white.
There's an interview where he talks. Yeah, there's an interview where he's just like, yeah, this has spells, like being a werewolf. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
It's something weird, and like I think I've seen that. Yeah.
Have you seen The Greasy Strangler?
I have seen The Greasy Strangler.
Okay, I'm trying to think of something equally horrible as Verotika for you to be forced to watch. Did you see Serenity last year?
I did not see Serenity.
Okay.
I've heard a lot about it. I'll watch Serenity.
It's horrible. But it's, oh God. Serenity. So you know which Serenity it is, right? It's the last year of Matthew McConaughey.
Yes, I do.
It's, oh.
Then Anne Hathaway, too, I think.
Yes. Woof.
Yeah, it was on How Did This Get Made? And
yeah, I listen to that podcast. I love it.
They were dumbfounded.
Yeah, it's something. Well, let's see. Maybe I can think of something better. So you have Shudder?
Yes.
All right. I know some really good stuff on Shudder that you may or may not have seen. Have you seen One Cut of the Dead?
I love One Cut of the Dead. Yeah.
Okay, great. Me too. Have you seen Dogs Don't Wear Pants?
I have not seen that. That played at Fantastic Fest last year, and I was really excited to see.
Dogs Don't Wear Pants. Don't watch Serenity. Dogs Don't Wear Pants.
Well, I'm telling you, you need to see Verotika.
I'll watch it. I'll review it. And I'll blame you.
Hey, I will shoulder that responsibility.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you, watch Dogs Don't Wear Pants. It is amazing. It's daring. That's the thing I love about Shudder, is it really does some daring movies that aren't especially necessarily horror. I wouldn't say this is exactly horror. I would say this is the kind of movie that'd be more along the lines of something Gaspar Noé could do, but not quite as in your face as Gaspar Noé, not quite as shocking as Gaspar Noé, but it deals with some really interesting, rarely touched upon stuff. And well, let me know what you think. It's good.
Well, and just if you can't get through Verotika, another suggestion I have is Vast of Night. It's on Amazon Prime right now.
I love it. I already seen it.
Vast of Night.
I've seen it.
Yeah,
reviewed it.
Pretty good.
I called it instant classic.
You've seen everything.
I reviewed it, seen it. I loved it. So good, beautiful.
Yeah, very good. Well, then you're stuck with Verotika.
I'm stuck with it. I'll do it. Well, thank you. This has been a lot of fun. We should definitely talk again. I will let you know when this actually gets posted, probably sometime next week. And feel free to reach out to me, man. I know Sam
same to you.
Sam Antha said that we'd have a good conversation. So she was right.
Yeah, absolutely. I could talk about films all day.
So if she's annoyed that we've been talking so long, it's her fault.
She's been patiently waiting for me to finish building the dresser. So yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again. You take care, guys.
Well, thank you very much. Take care.
Tell her hi for me and tell her to get that fanzine out. Or I can't get it until she gets it out.
She's trying to. We have to get ink for the printer.